Raging Creek. When's the last time you've been out to a creek and it's been flooded? 2 or 3 or 4 more times than normal. Pretty scary stuff, huh? I mean, not necessarily a river, but pretty powerful. How creeks can get whenever we have rain. Imagine that at night. Be pretty spooky. Raging Creek, written by Michael Pennington and voiced by Michael Pennington. The girl, who had just gotten kicked out of her parents' house at the age of 18, was distraught as she raced out of her home, long after the sun had set. She ran into the woods behind her house, and this was somewhere she never went alone. Her name was Carrie, with a K. And this wasn't the first time her drunken father had sent her from the home in a heated verbal battle. But tonight Carrie was fed up. Winded, she finally stopped to catch her breath. She bent over, puffing, tears running down her cheeks. She pulled out a keychain from her pocket that had a mini mag light and turned it on, deciding to go sit by the creek to calm down. Recent torrential rains had flooded the creek, turning it into a small churning river. She reached the water's edge and sat down on the bank that had been pushed up from the flood. The water was loud. She realized just how creepy it was out here at night, especially with the creek flowing this hard. Suddenly she heard a rush of footsteps behind her, coming down the wooded embankment. And surely this couldn't have been her dad. He could barely walk at the moment. As she stood to face the presence, she was grabbed up and placed over the shoulder of a tall, powerful man. She began to scream and kick to no avail. Her voice could barely be heard over the raging rush of water. The man began to walk into the water, toting her as the current swept them both downstream. Her screams were drowned out by the current. Everything went black as she swallowed creek water. The first flash of drowning filled every inch of her existence, and she knew she had to surface quick. She popped up from the churning depths, gasping and coughing. Swimming with the current, she choked as she was swept further downstream. She knocked a giant rock and a fallen log, and that was painful, but at least she was alive. She finally came to an area that opened up wider and was calmer. She could tell this was much deeper waters, probably well over 6 feet. The current still pulled at her, but she was able to swim in place. She looked around for the man that had attacked her. The bank of the creek here was elevated. Even if she was at the water's edge, which still appeared deep, she wouldn't be able to climb the creek wall. It was too tall. It was a chilling place to be stuck. Total blackness aside from moonlight, cool, rushing dark water churning around her, the sound of crickets, and knowing that a crazed man that had to be somewhere in the same vicinity was obviously out to kill her. She took in a few shallow breaths, wondering where he was. The more noise she made swimming, the more she would cringe and be forced to swim in place. Then a surge of water exploded behind her as the man rocketed out of the water, his arms outstretched, coming down on her. She screamed before being pulled down under, this time being choked as she again swallowed more water. She closed her mouth and managed to slip under the man's grasp, swimming under his legs and again surfacing, coughing and breathing for air. Gagging, she twisted in the current, looking in all directions. She cried hysterically, unable to be silent. She wished she'd never left the safety of her own home. There was no place scarier on earth than being stuck in this deep, secluded creek in complete blackness with somebody trying to drown her. Or possibly worse. She began to swim towards the bank, but was again pulled back under by the man. She gargled on her way down, her lungs filling with water. Blackness took over her body as the dark water blinded her. The man held tight this time, and The life began to seep out of her as she slowly began to drown. But just then, he too began to drown and immediately released her. She floated up, half conscious, surfacing, dangling in the water, desperate to not go back under. She swam in place, the water still calm here. She was weak, exhausted, and utterly panicked. The man surfaced beside her and she screamed. But he had drowned and was now floating face down. She pushed him away as his body slowly moved down the creek into faster currents. She slowly swam to the bank and clinched a tree root that grew out from the wall of the bank. She managed to climb on the large root and rest. With nothing left in her body, she passed out and didn't wake until early morning. When she opened her eyes, the man was standing above her. Screaming again, she woke up, as that was just a nightmare. Rain began to pelt the creek. The overnight sleep had given her some energy as she was able to pull herself up the bank, realizing she had just woke from a nightmare. Once on top, Carrie looked down one last time before walking back towards her house. About 15 feet from where she was sleeping on the root was the man, dead, eyes open, propped against a tangle of large roots. His death gaze had been glaring at her as she slept in the dark. A full 2 miles away from her home, she made it back around 10 a.m. Carrie is now 31 years old. She's never stepped foot in a single ounce of water outside her own bathtub since this incident.